welcome to Legislative Updates. I'm your host, Doug Thompson, with my co-host, John Barker. As you're looking at it on the screen, John should be on your left. And in between, in the middle, is Ron Highland. And Ron is from the 51st District out of the Wamego area. Nice to have you here.
Thank you.
And John, it's January 29th, Friday afternoon.
It is.
And you and Ron have just come out of the legislature and on your way back, and Ron's kind enough to come on in a little bit further and come into the studio to shoot legislative updates. Fill us in. What's been going on, because there's a lot going on from what I hear.
There is a lot going on, Doug. And of course, we missed last week because we were supposed to have Chris Croft on, and we're going to schedule him for next week. But I was just busy on Friday, and we had kicked out the value of both amendments out of my committee. We ran it on the floor on Friday, and it took about 4 hours. Mm-hmm. Initially, I had scheduled another hearing, which was the investigative committee hearing on a legislator that had a complaint filed against him. So we were on the floor about 4 hours. It passed. A lot of debate, and a lot of the debate I just didn't understand, because I couldn't understand why the other party, the Democrats, did not want the people of Kansas to vote. This is not a bar on abortion. Last April, in the Hodie decision versus Smith, the Supreme Court of the state of Kansas found that there is a constitutional right to abortion. We have a lot of regulations because Roe v. Wade, which was decided in 1973, did allow for abortions, but states were allowed to regulate. Like, we have parental consent. We have a 24-hour waiting period. We have the same standards in an abortion clinic that they would use in a doctor's clinic or a doctor's office or in a hospital. Because we found that in some clinics, in Kansas City particularly, they were just washing the instruments in a regular dishwasher. So we passed that. So the states do have the authority to regulate certain parts of it, late-term abortions especially. And the United States Supreme Court has allowed the states to do that. With this decision, this Hodie decision, it's just open. You can have an abortion at the very end of your pregnancy. We don't think that's right, so we have a constitutional amendment. It must pass both bodies, the House and the Senate, by 2/3. It is now, as of yesterday, the Senate passed it by 2/3, so it will go on the ballot. But I just can't believe that people don't, all in our Constitution, all power is invested with the people. So the only thing we're saying in this amendment is let the voters tell us, their representatives, whether or not the legislature should regulate some parts of the abortion as to what we have in place now.
So this would appear on the ballot, and all of those in Kansas who are
all
able
voters,
to vote and choose to, they would be able to have input.
Right.
Yes.
And in August of 2022, it will be on the ballot now. The governor has no say, because if she did, she would have, of course, vetoed it, I think. But no, it does not require the governor's signature. It's a constitutional amendment. It'll be on the ballot in August of 2022. And then the people will decide whether or not the state legislature can regulate abortion. We also, after that, at 1 o'clock, I think we got out 12:30, I had the hearing on one of our representatives, Democrat representatives out of Wyandotte County. I believe it was about 11 Democrats had filed a complaint against him. I chaired the committee. There was a lot of discussion. Well, it ended up that a motion was made that he would get an informal letter of warning. And then the charges, because all the charges were prior to him being elected to the House. And the voters were well aware of all those allegations and still chose to elect him. To overturn an election, that's a big burden. And I was not inclined to want to do that, because had that information not been available, there's a possibility you could consider some of it. But it was all out in Facebook and on the different newspapers, Kansas City Star. and several other newspapers. So the voters were aware of it, and he won the primary and then won the general election. And my belief is that our standards don't come into play until you raise your right hand, which we did on January the 11th, and from there forward. So that was the letter of warning, saying, now that you're a member of the Kansas House of Representatives, your conduct must improve. So that took several hours. That's the reason I missed last week's show, but other than that, things are going.
Yeah, I understand it. We're going to cut away, take a break. You're watching Legislative Updates. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Legislative Updates. I'm your host, Doug Thompson, with my co-host, John Barker, on the end. And in between is Ron Highland. And Ron, before I come over to you, I want to ask John a couple of things.
Sure.
John, you mentioned in the first segment that you were the, what is the call? I would know it as a judge, but what do they call you and when you supervise that hearing?
Chairman.
Chairman. And, of course, John, you were judge for 25 years,
right.
So it would make sense to me that you would be picked to
when
the
speaker came to my office, that's the reason he told me. He said, I need you to be fair. You're accustomed to being fair. You got a judge experience, so please chair this for me.
All right.
Okay.
All right. Ron, first off, thank you so much for coming out for Legislative Updates. And I know you've been working on, is it the Water Committee?
Yes.
And none of us last very long if we don't have water. So fill us in on what's going on with the legislature.
Well, this time around, and thank you for inviting me. And this year, the speaker, and partially it's my fault because I've made such an issue about water in our state for the last couple of years. And he called me on the phone and he says, do you still think water is very important? I said, sure I do. And he says, well, it's your committee. And so that's how I got it. And then he put me also on the Commerce Committee and the Taxation Committee. So I am really busy. But the Water Committee is interesting. He's given me some really good people on the committee. And our job is to look at everything associated with water. And if you look at that diagram, that is a listing of all the 16 different agencies and offices that have something to do with water in our state. And then you add on top of that, at least 5 federal agencies are also involved. So we're taking this one step at a time. What you see on that list, on that diagram, we are calling them in one at a time to explain to us, one, their mission statement. Second, tell us what you do and how you do it. And then we ask them, how many people do you have working in your group? We want to know head count, and we want to know your budget. So they have to come in and give us all that information. And then the last thing we ask for, who do you report to? And we're finding out some very interesting information. But we'll go through that entire thing. We've got 2 years to accomplish this, and we need to look at it and see if there's anything that can be done to either streamline and make it easier for the average Kansan to come in and find out how they can do whatever they need to do with water without having to go down this rabbit trail and to find out where they're going. I have entered in 7 bills this year. I'm an overachiever. That's just a fact.
That's a true statement.
But and 2 of them I testified this week. One of them was in my committee, had to do with water. It has water in the name. It was a water heater bill representing one of the hotels in my district. The fire marshal's office came in and said, you cannot have, that is not a water heater, we're going to call it a boiler. So when they did that, that goes into federal law where you have to redesign your entire room, a special blast door, shut-offs, and everything. So I tried to work with the fire marshal's office. A year and a half later, heard nothing. So I put this bill in. I changed it so that any water heater up to 120 gallons now and does not heat the water more than 210 degrees is exempt from all this nonsense. And as it turned out, several of the committee members are having the same problem in their district.
Okay.
So we'll take care of that.
And next week you're in front of my committee.
On Monday, I go to John's committee.
He's got another bill that's a good bill.
Rules and Regs bill.
Yeah.
Because of that committee I was on.
He was chairman of Rules and Regs.
Oh,
He brought
plus
it in.
the
He
agriculture.
brought it in last year, but because of the pandemic, we had to leave early.
I was the next one up to go to the floor to debate that bill, and they cut us off, and we all went home.
So.
The other bill I testified on was for another constituent whose family member went for an appointment and then thrown out of the facility, was not allowed back in. And it was a dementia person, and the assisted living place barricaded them from coming back in. So in looking into that, we found out that that's more common than you would think. It happens everywhere. In Kansas, the assisted living facilities are not regulated by the feds. Nursing homes are. So in Kansas, they can do that, and there's no recourse. So I brought that bill in. We're going to look at that. The committee's looking at it to see if there's some way we can remedy that.
Well, what happens to a person like that that's in an assisted living and goes out and then can't come back? I mean, where do they go? And what happens if they don't have family support that somebody is even aware of it?
It's a sad situation. Some of them
Go to homeless shelters.
homeless shelters, and some they try to take them home. They can't take care of them. They fail, and they pass away, unfortunately.
Well, thank you for getting on top of this.
It's not a pleasant thing. Well, these things happen all the time. All of us legislators get all these complaints, and we bring bills to try to correct them, and that's what we're there for. The Tax Committee. The big bill that we did here was SB 13, the one where for the tax transparency law, to where we're doing away with the tax lid for the counties.
Right.
Getting rid of that totally, but we want to replace it with one where they will be required to go to the public and explain why they're raising the taxes if it's above the CPI.
Right. And we had that bill last year.
Yeah.
When I was on tax. And, you know, when the property values go up, how the county commissioners, city commissioners just take that money. Now they can spend the money they had last year, but if they want that additional money, they have to send out public notice, and they've got to make a public vote.
And they do not want it.
And they don't want that.
We're hearing a lot about
Boy,
that.
you guys have got a lot going on at the legislature, and first off, I'm glad that you guys are involved in the legislature, because this is just really confusing time for many things.
Yeah.
But we're going to cut away, and we're going to take a break. You're watching Legislative Updates. Welcome back to Legislative Updates. I'm your host, Doug Thompson, with my co-host John Barker on your left as you're watching it on the screen, and in between us is Ron Highland from the 51st District, which is the Wamego area, and a very good area.
Well, thank you.
Well, I'm thinking about Wamego. How is the Wizard of Oz? How's that doing? The Oz Museum.
Every time you go
busy?
down that street, there are cars, out-of-state cars, parked in front of that place. It's always busy.
Awesome.
It's amazing.
That's good. We've had some people stop in to go through the museum, and they've told us that I said, why don't you go down to the Oz? And they said, we've already been there, and they talk very highly about it. Mm-hmm. John, where do you want to go to now as we're talking from what's going on with the legislature?
Well, this week, the governor finally admitted that her administration's unemployment program has been overrun with fraud. You know, when we started the pandemic, we had about $1 billion in our unemployment. We got an additional $300 million from the federal government, and we're down to about a little over north of $200 million left, which I think will last maybe a couple more months. What's interesting is Kansas has seen 1 million claims for initial unemployment, and there's only 1.5 million people in Kansas that are employed. So I would guess from that there is a lot of fraud. And I've talked to constituents in the county, and a lot of them tell me, employers particularly said, I got these names of people that filed for unemployment, and they say they worked for me, and they didn't. Or people that said, I didn't apply for unemployment because I've been working every day, but somebody filed in my name. So it's getting pretty bad. And Ron, who's on the Commerce Committee this week, I believe it was on Wednesday, when the governor admitted, or her staff said, that we've got a lot of fraud. And he's got some interesting statistics, don't you, Ron?
Well, thank you, John. And I think her statement followed some of the testimony we heard in our committee. We had two groups of people come in, and they both are HR management teams. And they represent not only school districts, but companies and other groups all over the state of Kansas. And they said that based on the information they've been overwhelmed, by the way. They cannot keep up with all the requests coming from the companies. They estimate that 73% of all the claims made in Kansas now are fraudulent.
73%?
73%. And we, the day before, and a couple days before, we invited the Department of Labor to come in and answer our questions. And they were less than helpful, let's just say it that way.
Yeah.
And we could not get any answers to our questions. So that followed up. We invited these outside groups to come in and explain what's going on because they're really in touch with it. And I have a chart. They provided a chart one day, and they showed us that Kansas is number 3 for unemployment claims in the country. And this data comes from
California is number 1, Illinois is number 2, and Kansas, which has a heck of a lot less people, is number 3.
And in 1 week, we had 66,000.
Right.
Over 66,000 claims.
We're almost half of California on those claims.
Yeah, we are.
Yes.
With our population versus California.
Yes.
I know. And they were warned before the pandemic. The federal government sent out a warning saying, hey, with this unemployment problem, you have to watch for fraud because that's going to be a big factor because of the number of people that are applying. And there'll be fictitious people or people taking advantage of other people, filing in their name. And so we were warned. Unfortunately, our Department of Labor did not take heed. And this, you mentioned today, we've got a new Secretary of Labor today, correct?
Yes, as of this afternoon.
I think that's number 4 under the Kelly administration. They go
January.
through them pretty fast. But it is bad. And you know,
when we had the department in,
Right.
we asked them point blank, were you hacked? And they looked us right in the eye and said, no, we were never hacked. Well, that may actually be true. But if you leave all your windows open and all the doors open, and anybody can come in and file a claim, you really technically weren't hacked.
Didn't have to be.
You didn't have to be. I mean, it was rampant. It's still rampant. Now we're catching the ramifications of all this.
Yeah.
We burned through $1 billion. And that money, as these folks explained to us, it goes to a bank. When they make a payment from the state, it goes to a bank somewhere. And then that money, within a few seconds, disappears.
Right.
It goes overseas through an offshore account or whatever. And they said there was a Nigerian that they interviewed, USA Today interviewed him, and he said, I can make $50,000 in a day. And he told them how he did it. He says, I belong to Ancestry.com, and I can find out whatever I need to know to fill out these forms.
Right.
Anyway, it's a huge mess.
It
It's
is.
going to cost, and the employers, all of us legislators are hearing from these people, and they're getting angry. They are angry to the point they're being thrown out of their houses, whatever. It's a bad situation, and the companies now, they could be paying more in unemployment tax than they will in income tax to try to fill this hole.
That is true.
It's just a total mess.
And a couple of months ago, I saw this coming on the Post Audit Committee. So we asked Post Audit to go over to the Department of Labor and do an audit. We won't get those results for several more months.
Right.
But it's going to be bad. It is. And because I don't understand, because the Kelly administration was warned by the federal government, this is going to be a problem. And they did not heed that warning.
They ignored it, and the state's going to be paying for it.
What's the chance of getting any significant amount of this money back?
None.
None. It's all overseas.
They said when it
Really?
leaves the country, that's it.
And it's just poor planning
Yeah.
on their part.
And poor action.
And of course, they're blaming their computer system. But they've just shut down for 3 days
Right.
to put some upgrades on it. So it's going to be a
One
scandal.
suggestion was to give everybody a unique identifier. Everybody, all the employers in the state.
Mm-hmm.
They did not do it, and now they're saying, well, this is something we have to do. It's sad.
Yeah, that is.
All right, we're going to cut away, take a break. You're watching Legislative Updates. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Legislative Updates. I'm your host, Doug Thompson, with my co-host, John Barker. It's on your left on your screen. In between is Ron Highland from the 51st District. And John, we were just talking about the unemployment that Ron was sharing with us.
Right.
And if somebody has a question, if they need some help, can they go to your website?
Please do. It's John Barker 2012 at yahoo.com. I would like for you to put your full name, the last four of your Social Security number and your date of birth, and if you have a claim number with the Department of Labor, add that in, and I will forward it to the Department of Labor, and I'll get a response for you.
All right, man, that's great. Thank you. Thank you for that. Ron, thank you for coming out.
Thank you.
I know you guys have had a busy week, and it's there's a lot going on in the legislature, and I'm sorry to hear that the governor lost an awful lot of money, and I don't know how all that's going to turn out, but maybe next week we'll have more information. So thanks for watching Legislative Updates. See you next time.